Imagine a scene that seems to have been taken from a movie. A delivery man named Robert was on a normal day at work delivering packages. Little did he know that day, he would be the hero of an unbelievable story. It all started when Robert was given the task of delivering chains and iron bars to a house. The package seemed a little strange, but he followed the instructions. When he arrived at the address, the house looked ordinary. Beautiful, well-kept, but with one curious detail. The mail was piled up as if no one had come to the door for days. Robert knocked several times, but no one answered. He persisted, and in a moment of silence, he heard a muffled sound coming from inside. It was as if someone was trying to speak, but with great difficulty. He tried to listen better and finally made out a faint request, "Open the door." The door was unlocked, so Robert went in calling for someone. The house was quiet and dark with a sense of abandonment. Suddenly, he heard a faint scream coming from upstairs. Frightened but determined to help, he went upstairs and found a scene he would never forget. In a room locked with iron bars and a padlock, there was a thin, dehydrated woman with handcuffs on her wrists. She was so weak that she could barely lift her head. Her name was Aurora, and Robert knew he had to act quickly. Without thinking twice, he called the police, who arrived on the scene in a matter of minutes. The paramedics took Aurora out of that horrible room and soon realized the state she was in, malnourished and visibly traumatized. She was rushed to the hospital, and even though he wasn't forced to, Robert decided to go with her. Something about that woman aroused genuine concern in him. At the hospital, the situation began to get even stranger. Aurora was so weak that she could barely speak, but in a few whispers, the police managed to discover something shocking. The main suspect for having arrested her like that was none other than her own husband, William, who was missing. The story seemed like a mystery from a movie. Why would William have done this? Where was he? And why did Aurora seem so scared and, at the same time, so silent? What Robert didn't know was that this was just the tip of the iceberg of a drama that would completely change the lives of everyone involved. Aurora's trauma revealed. After being rescued, Aurora began to recover physically in the hospital, but it was clear that something was still very wrong. She barely spoke, avoided looking at people, and seemed trapped in a world of her own. When she finally managed to say a few words to Robert, he was shocked. Aurora told him that she had been locked in the house by her own husband, William. He locked her in the room and then simply disappeared. She was hungry, weak, and if it hadn't been for Robert's courage in entering the house, who knows what would have happened to her. The mystery only deepened when William, her missing husband, showed up at the hospital. He suddenly entered Aurora's room with a tense and nervous face. As soon as he saw her, he began to insist. "You can't stay here, Aurora. It's dangerous." For the first time, Aurora showed firmness. With a trembling voice, she answered, "I'm not going back home, William. I don't want to be trapped again." William tried to justify himself. "I did it to protect you. You don't understand." The conversation quickly turned into chaos, with Aurora becoming visibly shaken and William becoming more anxious by the minute. Robert, who was there in the room, realized that something was very wrong. He ran out and told a nurse to call the police because the man everyone was looking for was right there. The police arrived quickly and took William in for questioning. Meanwhile, Aurora seemed calmer, but something unexpected happened. When Robert went to get her a glass of water, he came back and discovered that the room was empty. Aurora had disappeared. What's more, Robert's wallet, with all the money he had, was also gone. He was in disbelief. Why would she do that? He muttered to himself, feeling a mixture of worry and disappointment. It was then that he received a notification on his cell phone. Someone had just used his card to make a purchase at a nearby supermarket. Without thinking twice, Robert went to the location but didn't find Aurora. He started asking people on the street if anyone had seen a woman with her features. Finally, a lady pointed to a more remote area of the city, known for being dangerous. Even though he was scared, Robert decided to go after her. When he found her, Aurora was talking to a tall, menacing-looking man. From a distance, he saw Aurora hand a bag, probably from the supermarket, to the man, who, in return, gave her something small and discreet. Robert's heart sank when he saw that. After the man left, Aurora opened what she had received, stared at it, and suddenly began to cry. She threw the object on the floor, fell to her knees, and cried as if the world was falling apart. Robert didn't hesitate. He approached slowly and crouched down next to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Aurora raised her face, tears streaming down her face, and spoke out like never before. "I can't stand living like this anymore. I don't want to depend on this to feel anything anymore. I just want to forget what happened to my son." Robert, even without fully understanding what she meant, knew that she needed help. Carefully, he held out his hand. "Let's go back to the hospital. You need help, and that's what I'm here for." Aurora accepted, and the two walked back together. For the first time, she seemed willing to face the ghosts of the past and seek a chance to start over. Aurora and William's past. Aurora and William had everything to live a beautiful love story. They met when they were young and, even without much money, they had big dreams and believed that together they could overcome anything. They got married, full of hope, and courageously faced the financial difficulties that appeared along the way. Despite everything, they were happy because they had each other. The couple's joy reached its peak when Aurora discovered she was pregnant. It was a magical moment. They cried with happiness, laughed, and made 1,000 plans for the future. William worked hard to ensure the best for his wife and the baby that was to come. He worked overtime, saved every penny, and even managed to rent a bigger house for the new family. But life doesn't always go according to plan, and the birth brought complications that no one expected. Aurora lost a lot of blood and spent days in the hospital, struggling to recover. Despite this, the baby was born healthy, and William couldn't be more proud. He could barely hold back the tears as he held his son in his arms for the first time. For Aurora, however, things were not so simple. Shortly after the birth, something changed. Aurora seemed distant, lost in her own thoughts. She barely looked at the baby and avoided holding him. William, worried, insisted that she seek medical help. That's when the diagnosis came: postpartum depression. In the following months, the situation was difficult for everyone. William tried to do everything he could to help Aurora and, at the same time, take care of the baby and support the household. He was exhausted, but he never complained. He loved his family and believed that everything would be okay with time. Aurora began treatment and, little by little, showed some signs of improvement. But even after a year, she still seemed to struggle with an emptiness that she couldn't explain. She wanted to be the mother and wife she always dreamed of, but something inside her seemed broken. One day, the impossible happened. Aurora, tired and overwhelmed, came back from the supermarket with the baby in the car. She took the groceries inside, organized everything, and, exhausted, threw herself on the bed to rest. When she woke up hours later, she had a shock that changed her life forever. She had forgotten the baby in the car. Desperate, Aurora ran to see her son, but it was too late. She took the little one to the hospital, but the doctors could do nothing. He was gone. The grief was unbearable. Aurora blamed herself for the accident and plunged into a sadness that seemed to have no end. The pain was so great that some nights she wished she were no longer alive. William tried to be strong for both of them, but he was also devastated. He had lost not only his son, but also the wife he loved so much, who was now just a shadow of her former self. Over time, Aurora began to get involved with illicit substances. It was the only way she found to escape the guilt and pain. William tried to help her in every way. He took her to doctors, therapy sessions, and even sold his car to avoid further accidents. But nothing seemed to work. The woman he loved was disappearing before his eyes, and he didn't know how to bring her back. This series of tragedies shaped the couple and put them on a journey full of challenges, where love and the fight for life would be tested at every turn. William's extreme measure. William was completely lost. He loved Aurora more than anything, but watching her sink deeper and deeper was like watching a storm destroy everything they had built together. She was no longer the smiling, dreamy woman he had known. The pain of losing his son and his addiction were consuming Aurora completely. After trying everything, doctors, treatments, and even selling his car to avoid further danger, William felt he had no way out. Aurora no longer wanted help, and he was afraid that at any moment she might do something terrible to herself. That was when he made a desperate decision. He locked her in the bedroom. He reinforced the door with iron bars and put chains on it. To anyone else, it might seem cruel, but to William, it was an attempt to save the life of the woman he loved. He believed that if he could keep her away from substances and dangers for long enough, she could recover. It was an extreme measure, but he no longer saw any other option. In the first few days, Aurora screamed and cried, but over time, she calmed down. William took care of her with the greatest affection possible. He brought her food, water, and did everything he could to make her feel cared for, even in that situation. He believed he was seeing small improvements. Aurora seemed a little more lucid and even talked at times. But while William dedicated all his time and energy to caring for Aurora, his own health began to deteriorate. He was always tired, felt dizzy, and could barely eat. People around him noticed that he was very down, but William ignored the signs. He thought, "I can't stop now. She needs me." One day, William had to run an important errand in a nearby city. Even though he was worried about leaving Aurora alone, he locked the door to his room and promised he would be back soon. During the trip, it was very hot, and he began to feel even worse. As he walked down a deserted street, everything went dark, and he fainted. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. The doctors explained that he had fainted due to extreme fatigue and ran tests to better understand what was happening. Then came the devastating news. William had leukemia, a serious illness that explained all the symptoms he had been ignoring. Despite the shock, his first concern was not for himself, but for Aurora. He begged the doctors to let him go home, but they insisted that he needed to stay in hospital. William, however, refused. He knew that Aurora was alone and needed him. Without permission, he escaped from the hospital and ran home. When he arrived, he found the house empty. The room was open, the iron bars had been removed, and Aurora was no longer there. On the news, he saw what had happened. The police had discovered Aurora trapped and taken her to the hospital. William collapsed on the floor. He had never wanted to hurt Aurora. Everything he had done was to try to save her. Now, he did not know what would become of them, but one thing was certain. He was willing to face everything, even his own illness, to protect her and try to give her a chance to start over. The beginning of recovery, Aurora knew she needed help. After everything that had happened, she was tired of living in that spiral of pain and guilt. That was when William, despite all the suffering he himself was facing, suggested something that could change their lives, admitting her to a rehabilitation clinic. "It's going to be difficult, Aurora," he said with a voice full of emotion, "but I believe in you, and I'll be here, waiting for you." Aurora hesitated, but realized that it was the best thing for her. So together they decided that she would stay in a specialized clinic where she would receive all the medical and psychological support she needed. William chose the place carefully, a quiet place surrounded by nature, ideal for Aurora to focus solely on her recovery. On the day they said goodbye, William held Aurora's hands tightly. He didn't cry, but his eyes were full of concern and love. Aurora noticed how thin and pale he was, but he always said that everything was fine. "Promise you'll try?" William asked. "I promise," Aurora replied, with a shy smile. The days at the clinic were not easy. Aurora endured long therapy sessions, talked about her deepest pains, and worked to overcome her dependence on the substances that controlled her. She also had to deal with the grief of her son, a feeling that never seemed to go away. In the beginning, there were days when she wanted to give up, but then she would think of William and everything he had sacrificed to help her. This gave her strength. During treatment, the only way they could contact each other was through letters. He wrote regularly, always with words of support and encouragement. But as the months went by, Aurora noticed something strange in William's letters. His handwriting seemed to change, becoming increasingly shaky, and the frequency of his messages decreased. Even so, she clung to the kind words he said, believing that it was just the fatigue of taking care of everything while she was away. After a year of treatment, Aurora was finally ready to return home. She had changed completely. Her mind was stronger, and the sparkle in her eyes that seemed lost had begun to return. Now, she felt that she could face life again, without her addictions and without letting herself be consumed by guilt. But when she got home, Aurora was in for a surprise. The person who answered the door was not William, but Robert, the delivery man who had been a key player in her story. He seemed nervous and hesitated before speaking. "Aurora, there's something you need to know. William is not well." Aurora felt her heart tighten. She quickly entered the house and saw an envelope on the table. It was a letter from William. He explained that he had hidden his illness from her because he didn't want to interfere with her recovery. William was facing leukemia alone, while she fought for her own life. Without thinking twice, Aurora asked Robert to take her to the hospital where William was hospitalized. When she got there and saw him lying there pale, but still with that loving look that had always welcomed her, Aurora cried. She knew that now it was her turn to take care of him. At that moment, Aurora made a decision. She would do everything in her power to support William, just as he had done for her. After all, their love, even after so many storms, was still the strength that kept them standing. The couple's overcoming. After so many struggles, something incredible happened. William received the news that he and Aurora had been waiting for. A compatible donor had been found for the bone marrow transplant. It was the chance he needed to beat leukemia and continue living with Aurora. The day of the transplant was full of emotions. Aurora was by William's side the whole time, holding his hand tightly, as if she wanted to transfer all the energy and love she felt for him. William, even though he was weak, looked at her with a calm smile, as if to say, "We will overcome this together." The recovery was not easy, but William grew stronger every day. Aurora took care of him with all the affection, preparing healthy meals, organizing his medicines, and even telling funny stories to distract him. She made sure to remind him with every little gesture how important he was to her. When the doctors finally gave the good news that William was cured, the two hugged each other and cried like children. That battle had been won, and now they had a new chance to rebuild the life they had dreamed of. With William's health restored, the couple began to make plans for the future. They wanted to leave behind all the pain of the past and focus on what made them happy. One of these decisions was the most special of all. They decided to have another child. At first, Aurora was unsure. She still carried the emotional scars of what had happened in the past. But William, with all his patience, calmed her down. "It will be different this time, Aurora. We are stronger now. And above all, we will face this together." When Aurora found out she was pregnant, the couple was overjoyed. They laughed, cried, and began to imagine what the new chapter of their lives would be like. Happiness was evident in every little detail. Aurora loved talking about the baby and had already started planning the nursery, while William made lists of names and dreamed of family moments. The pregnancy brought a new energy to the house. Aurora, now much more confident and healthy, lived her days with ease and gratitude. William was always close by, taking care of her and the baby that was to come, as if each moment were a gift. As the months went by, the couple realized that they were finally living a phase of stability and joy that they had never experienced before. They knew that life was not perfect, but they were determined to enjoy every second of this new opportunity to be happy together. The wait for the baby became the bright spot in their lives. And for the first time in a long time, Aurora and William felt that, despite all the storms, their love had grown stronger and guided them towards a bright future. The adoption of Robert's son. The news of Robert's death came as a shock to Aurora and William. He was more than just a delivery man who helped them through a difficult time. He had become a friend, someone who believed in them and never gave up on helping. Learning that Robert had died in an accident left the couple deeply shaken. Sometime later, during a visit to Robert's mother's house to pay her condolences, Aurora noticed a framed photo of a baby on the bookshelf. Curiously, she asked, "Who is this beautiful baby?" Robert's mother sighed before answering, with sadness in her voice. "This is Robert's son. He was born shortly before the accident. The child's mother left the baby with him and never came back. And now, my grandson is in an orphanage because I am unable to take care of him. Aurora and William looked at each other at that moment. No words were spoken, but they both knew exactly what the other was thinking. They couldn't let that little boy grow up without a home, without someone who would love him like Robert loved his family. That night, Aurora and William talked about the idea of adopting Robert's son. It wasn't a difficult decision. They felt that this was a way to honor everything Robert had done for them, as well as give this little boy a chance to grow up surrounded by love and care. "He's done so much for us," William said, holding Aurora's hand. "It's the least we can do for him." After they had taken care of all the necessary paperwork, the day of the adoption arrived. Aurora and William went to the orphanage, anxious and excited. When they saw the baby for the first time, their hearts filled with tenderness. He was small, with big, curious eyes and a shy smile that seemed to light up the room. "Hello, little one," Aurora said, with tears in her eyes. "Now you're part of our family." Taking the baby home, they felt that something had been completed in their lives. Aurora held him in her arms with great care, while William drove with a smile he couldn't hide. They named the boy Lucas, a tribute to the light he brought into their lives, even at such a difficult time. Over time, Lucas not only brought joy to the couple, but also further strengthened the bond of love and overcoming between them. Aurora and William always told Lucas stories about Robert, making sure he knew how kind and courageous his biological father was. Adopting Lucas was not just a gesture of love. It was Aurora and William's way of transforming the pain of loss into a new beginning. He was the link that united the past and the future, a symbol that even in the midst of life's storms, there is always room for love, hope, and a new beginning. Aurora and William were finally living a phase that seemed like a dream. The house was full of laughter and joy, with two little treasures lighting up their lives. Their biological son, still a baby, and Lucas, the boy they decided to adopt and who was already an inseparable part of the family. Their routine was full of little moments that made it all worthwhile. William loved telling Lucas stories before bed, stories that he made up on the spot, full of adventures and happy endings. Aurora, in turn, was tireless in caring for her two children, always with that sparkle in her eyes of someone who knew she was experiencing something precious. But what made everything even more special was the gratitude they felt. They knew how much they had fought to get there, how much they had faced together, from the tragedies of the past to the moments of hope and overcoming. Each step brought them to that moment of peace and happiness. On quiet nights, after the children were asleep, Aurora and William would often sit on the couch, side by side, in silence. They didn't need to say anything. They just looked at each other and knew what the other was thinking. We did it. They reflected on everything they had been through. The pain, the grief, the difficulties, everything seemed unbearable at first. But with love, faith, and the strength they found in each other, they managed to overcome every obstacle. Aurora used to say, "I thought it was impossible to start over, but you always believed in us, William. And now look where we are." And William would reply, smiling, "You believed in us too, Aurora. That's what brought us here." Their story was living proof that no matter how difficult the times, true love can transform any situation. Faith in better days and mutual support were the keys that opened the way to a future that neither of them imagined possible. With two children in their arms and a home full of love, Aurora and William learned that life is not about never falling, but about getting up, leaning on those you love, and keeping going. And together, they were sure that they were ready for whatever the future brought.